Welcome back to the Repurposing Business podcast. We're on to principle number 48 if you're counting. You might have seen the t-shirts in the olden days that said, "Don't follow me, I'm lost." Well, here's a principle. Sometimes you might need to look confused to confuse your enemy. What do I mean by that? Well, in the book of Exodus chapter 14, they'd got out of Egypt and they're heading towards the desert. And then God tells them, cut back and go back towards Cairo, if you like. Go back towards where you've come from, because it's going to confuse it. The people are going to say, these guys can't get out of the desert. They don't know how to get out of here. They're confused. They're wandering around. Let's go after them and attack them. Wow, that's a little bit scary if you're an Israelite and you're thinking, let me get out of town. Let me get as much distance between myself and Pharaoh's armies as I can. And God said, no, loop back, dangle some bait, because then they're going to pursue you. That's a little bit scary. Sometimes God uses the foolish things to confound the wise, the scripture says in Corinthians. Sometimes your business strategies are going to look stupid to your competitors, but it's part of God's strategy to confuse the enemy. Sometimes God will tell you to do something counterintuitive. Obey anyway. I remember once in Cape Town, I was meeting with a businessman, and he had set aside 100,000 to set up a new business. And he had that capital set aside, and God told him to give away 70,000. That's 70% of his startup capital. It looked stupid, but he did it. Why would God ask somebody to do that? Well, sometimes because we're placing our trust in that capital. Sometimes it's to test obedience. Sometimes it's to meet a need. That's God's business, but he felt God told him to do it. Shortly thereafter, he woke up in the middle of the night and he had an idea about creating a new device. I won't go into all the details. And so he sketched it out, made a prototype, and then went to a potential customer and said, could you use something like this? It was a bit of an obscure product. And the customer said, we've been looking for something like this for 5 years, and placed an initial order of 32,000 units. Needless to say, he got his startup capital back. Sometimes God will ask you to do something that looks foolish in order to confuse your enemies, particularly in this area of generosity, in the areas of sacrifice, in the areas of career moves. Some of you have made what somebody would call downwardly mobile career moves, suicide career moves, but God spoke, and if you hadn't obeyed, you wouldn't have been positioned to get a breakthrough. Yes, Israel ended up with the Egyptian army on their tail, and we'll cover that in a future session. But for the moment, when God tells you to do something and it even looks a little bit stupid, if it's him speaking, obedience is more important than logic. Until tomorrow.